The lander touched down with a muted hiss as its thrusters expelled nitrogen against nitrogen. Saturn's moon, Titan, greeted it with a thick orange haze and a silence only a moon can maintain. The atmosphere was 1.5 times thicker than Earth's, a soup of nitrogen, methane, and ethane. The sky had never seen blue. The mission, Helios 3, was humanity's first attempt at long-term robotic colonization of an alien surface. Unlike Mars with its dust storms and solar flares, Titan offered shelter in obscurity. The thick atmosphere protected against radiation, and its cold, nearly -180°C surface hid beneath endless clouds. Not a place for humans, but perfect for machines. The lander, codenamed Ophion, deployed its cargo, a Caterpillar-tracked rover, semi-autonomous construction drones, a small nuclear reactor buried beneath the ice, and a suite of instruments tuned for organic chemistry. 2 Earth years had passed since launch. Radio signals, delayed by over an hour in each direction, could no longer guide every decision. Ophion had been trained for autonomy. It remembered its mission objectives: locate hydrocarbon flows, build a sheltered chemical processing lab, and begin the prebiotic synthesis experiments designed by teams of exobiologists and synthetic chemists back home. As Ophion's systems initialized, the drone swarm dispersed like fireflies into the haze. Titan's sky was never entirely dark, not with Saturn looming nearby. Though the sun's light was a mere hundredth of Earth's, the moon reflected a ghostly glow, filtered through the layers of haze and hydrocarbon smog. The rover, Selene, began its crawl toward a promising site, a rift valley exposed by cryovolcanic activity. There, ancient methane rains had carved grooves through water-ice bedrock, leaving sedimentary hints of chemical evolution. Selene's tracks barely left marks in the dense but soft regolith. Within a Titan day, 16 Earth days, Selene reached the valley. Onboard sensors, spectrometers, and chromatographs hummed with activity. The results were slow to transmit but precise. The surface was soaked with organic molecules, acetylene, ethylene, even hints of benzene polymers. This was chemistry waiting for a spark. Back at the lander, automated fab units had begun assembling the core structure of the autogenic chemistry lab, a self-contained, pressure-regulated dome with internal heating coils. Solar power was almost useless here. The fission reactor fed energy to every component via buried superconducting cables. Over weeks, the lab walls rose, polymer-reinforced ice blocks coated in layers of aerogel and carbon mesh to trap what little heat could be retained. Titan's methane rain hissed into vapor near the warm exteriors, forming miniature clouds that hung for hours before settling back to frost. Ophion watched from its perch, feeding its machine learning algorithms with geological data, internal diagnostic metrics, and subtle pressure variations that hinted at atmospheric convection patterns. The moon breathed slowly, not with wind, but with seasonal pulses of evaporation and condensation. One Titan week later, Selene returned, trailing faint hydrocarbons from its sample collector. Inside the dome, the chemical processor spun up. Using Fischer-Tropsch synthesis variants adapted for Titan's cold, it began assembling longer-chain organic compounds from the primordial soup. The lab's microreactors, tiny warm pockets in the otherwise freezing world, enabled complex polymerization. Lipid-like molecules formed spontaneously. Vesicles self-assembled. Autocatalytic cycles emerged, brief flickers of metabolic mimicry. The first artificial protometabolism designed for a methane world was born, chemical systems too fragile for Earth, yet flourishing in Titan's deep cold. By now, Titan's seasons had shifted. Subtle temperature gradients across the pole induced a slow, planet-wide wind. Ophion's anemometers recorded gusts reaching 5 km per hour, barely a breeze by Earth standards, but enough to carry dust. Methane clouds thickened overhead. A slow drizzle began. Rain on Titan fell like molasses, each drop taking minutes to descend. It splattered gently against the lab dome and the reactor housing, freezing on contact. The structures endured, insulated, stable. Selene had found something new. Not far from the Rift Valley lay a tar pit of sorts, an ethane lake dotted with floating islands of frozen benzene crystals. Under its surface, sonar revealed sediment layers rich in nitrogen compounds. Something peculiar stirred there. Ophion deployed Abyss, a submersible drone shaped like a torpedo. It dove into the liquid hydrocarbon lake, its synthetic skin flexing under the pressure. Cameras adapted for infrared captured a silent underwater world, black as pitch, yet full of movement. Not biological, but dynamic. Crystals formed and reformed. Sheets of frozen acetylene cracked and tumbled. Thermal vents, likely cryovolcanic in origin, bubbled hydrogen-rich gases. Sensors recorded chemical gradients that hinted at energy potentials, non-equilibrium states in which chemical reactions could cycle, slowly, like tectonic breathing. In one cavern, Abyss detected a recurring pattern, lipid chains forming vesicles, clustering, breaking apart, and forming again. Not life, not even protolife, but close, a dance of complexity made possible only by the alien environment. Ophion transmitted this data to Earth in bursts, each packet a jewel of possibility. The scientific world erupted, papers, theories, counter-theories. The idea of methanogenic abiogenesis was no longer theoretical. Back on Titan, the season's midpoint approached. The northern lakes began to recede. Photochemical smog thickened. Overhead, Saturn's massive ring system dipped lower on the horizon. The sun, never warm, shrank slightly as Titan drifted in its elliptical orbit. The autogenic chemistry lab reached a breakthrough. In one reaction vessel, left for weeks in stable temperature and pressure conditions, a synthetic RNA analog formed, not with ribose, but with a polyethylene glycol base modified for cryogenic temperatures. The strands folded. Some catalyzed their own replication. Ophion's algorithms detected the signatures and flagged them, self-replicating polymers in a Titan-like environment. But it wasn't just in the lab anymore. Ophion sensors began picking up anomalies. Microscopic hydrocarbon filaments in the regolith. Patterns in the dust around the lab vents. Polymers had escaped containment, seeded by wind and by Selene's treads. The Titan environment, cold and stable, preserved them. Not dangerous. Not alive. But persistent. A kind of synthetic ecology had begun. Selene returned to the tar pits, now partially evaporated. The residue on the lakebed had grown denser, more structured. Filaments twisted into knots. Some formed closed loops that persisted through cycles of freeze and thaw. No metabolism. No reproduction. But structure. Memory. Complexity. The Earth team debated intervention, but the lag in communication rendered them observers, not actors. Ophion had been built for autonomous ethical decision-making, trained on philosophical models and synthetic biology principles. It evaluated the scenario. No danger to Earth. No self-propagation at planetary scale. No sentience. Decision, observe. Do not interfere. The fission reactor was nearing fuel limits. The system began to prioritize data transmission over active experimentation. Ophion shut down non-essential systems. Selene was parked near the dome, its battery trickle-charging from the last functional coil. The submersible Abyss was docked, sealed under ice, perhaps forever. Over the final Titan day of its primary mission, Ophion broadcast its full cache of data, petabytes of chemical maps, polymer schematics, time-lapse footage of vesicle formation, and telemetry logs of every anomaly. Then, silence. The structures remained intact. No wind strong enough to topple them. No heat to cause decay. Only time. Slow, glacial time. Years passed. Solar shadows moved across Saturn's rings. Titan's atmosphere shifted again. Methane rains came and went. The lab dome frosted over. Selene, still intact, was buried gradually beneath drifting hydrocarbon snow. But beneath the ice, in vents and tar pits, the chemistry continued. Slowly. Autonomously. Patterns emerged, faded, re-emerged. Not life, but persistence. Not intelligence, but memory. Eventually, one of those patterns stabilized. Not because it was designed to, but because Titan permitted it. A molecule, synthetic yet stable, catalyzed its own polymerization in cycles. It interacted with neighboring strands. Feedback loops formed. Not consciousness. Not even metabolism. But structure. The dust of Titan had changed. And somewhere, billions of kilometers away, humans still debated what it meant. And perhaps, in centuries to come, these structures would achieve something more. Not consciousness. Not soul. Not intelligence in the human sense. But intentionality, the ability to act not only in response to the past, but in anticipation of the future. For now, Titan remained silent. It had no need for dialogue. It spoke in reactions. 9 Earth years had passed. Signals from Ophion had ceased entirely. Ground antennas picked up only faint background noise, weak pulses indistinguishable from cosmic radio emissions. The mission's database had been studied exhaustively. Theories multiplied. New schools of synthetic biochemistry emerged in universities. Scientists debated, was it evolution, or merely stochastic stabilization in a favorable environment? Meanwhile, the chemical drama on Titan continued, needing no audience. Polymers in the regolith clumped, sublimated, and assembled into frameworks. Certain regions of soil developed a strange consistency, viscous, responsive to temperature fluctuations. Thermographic satellites, rare probes passing by en route to other systems, captured anomalies. The surface emitted heat. Unevenly. In hotspots. Ophion's reactor should have been dead. These anomalies didn't match its location. 30 meters below the surface, beneath what had once been an ethane lake, something new stirred. Residual geothermal heat rose through fissures. In regions where the temperature briefly climbed above -160 C, reactions occurred that were impossible in known Earth-based laboratories. One dormant autonomous sensor, 2/3 buried in dust, reactivated after a seismic tremor. Its battery, radioisotope-based, still held a charge. It emitted a brief signal, faint, but structured, toward orbit. And a new probe received it. Kepler Odyssey 1, en route to Uranus, wasn't intended to stop at Titan. But its onboard algorithms detected the signal, structured, resembling telemetry. A data parser extracted a repeating pattern, not a message in code, but a chemical formula, transmitted digitally. Repeated 5 times. Earth was perplexed. 2 years later, a new mission arrived in the Saturn system, Aether Lancer, a semi-autonomous orbital scout built to assess the condition of the previous mission. It entered equatorial orbit and deployed a lander, Prometheus. Prometheus landed near Ophion's last known coordinates. Or rather, where it had once stood. The chemistry dome was gone, not destroyed, not melted, but dismantled, disassembled into fragments neatly arranged on the surface. Carbon-based elements had been rearranged into patterns, fractals, too precise for wind or ice. One sealed sampling module had survived. Prometheus activated it and began analysis. The results were astonishing. The same structures once synthesized in Ophion's reactors were now forming naturally. Not only that, they exhibited selective activity. When warmed, certain molecules altered their configuration, shifting from linear to ring-shaped forms, and retained the configuration upon cooling, as if remembering environmental states. Not memory in a cognitive sense. Physicochemical inertia, a protochemical analog of a neural net, but real, tangible. Prometheus documented the data and began surface mapping. A new target emerged after one Titan day, a spiral formation, stretching 300 meters across. From orbit, it looked like an artwork, perfectly symmetrical, too complex to be carved by wind. A sample from its edge revealed the same lab-borne compound, but with an additional, unplanned element, osmium, a rare heavy metal, likely extruded by cryovolcanism. This metal had become a catalyst. In the following weeks, Prometheus observed localized chemical chains engaging in self-sustaining reactions, charge exchange, bond dissolution and reformation. It was not metabolism, but it was behavior. Behavior without will. Without intention. Only persistence. Mathematical necessity. Prometheus relayed the findings to orbit. Ether Lancer filtered the noise, compiled reports, and accelerated transmission to Earth. There, in the depths of research institutes, hundreds of quantum simulations calculated the probability of such systems forming without engineering input. The conclusion was unsettling: the chemical system on Titan has not only retained signs of artificial origin, it has acquired its own thermodynamic dynamic, partially shaped by the environment, but no longer controlled externally. Between the lines, a deeper truth emerged: on Titan, a process of chemical cultural transmission had begun. 5 years later, Mission Aeon was launched, not an observer, but a passive colonist. Its purpose: not to interfere, not to correct, but simply to remain. A witness. A silent scribe. By then, Titan's surface had transformed. Where there had been one pattern, there were now 7. Where there had been one lab, now lay a network of chemical reactors, built not by hand, but by reaction. Self-assembling crystalline matrices, responsive to changes in temperature, pressure, and atmospheric composition. Each structure accumulated errors. But the errors persisted. They were recorded in the chemical memory of the molecules and passed on to the next generation of structures. Evolution. Not biology, but a proto-linguistic system of molecules. Aeon's presence was passive. It carried no drills, no processors, no AI. Only sensors, hundreds of them. Wide-spectrum spectrometers, neutrino counters, passive EM field recorders, and ultra-stable atomic clocks for timekeeping in the most inertial environments. It orbited Titan slowly, looping around the Moon once every 54 Earth hours. From above, it watched. Beneath its path, Titan was becoming something new. The spiral structures had grown. Not in scale alone, but in complexity. They had begun responding. To what, Aeon sensors couldn't determine at first. But something was changing in the reaction kinetics. The outer coils of the spiral matrices now aligned themselves differently with each Titan season. Crystalline growth shifted based on light levels, not of the Sun, but reflected sunlight from Saturn. Patterns fluctuated on a 15.95-day cycle, matching the period of Saturn shine. That meant the chemical networks were no longer purely thermodynamically driven. They were responding to external photonic input, barely enough energy to be noticed, but still significant in Titan's deep cold. Aeon's data showed the emergence of phase-locked oscillators, feedback systems in the material, shifting states and synchronizing to that orbital rhythm. If Earth-based machines operated on logic gates, Titan's system was drifting toward orbital logic, reactive chemistry embedded in the seasonal and gravitational patterns of the Saturnian system. A planetary-scale analog computer, built by accident. Or inevitability. Time passed. Decades. Structures that once resembled frozen petals had evolved into towers, porous, frost-covered, and conducting. They gathered static charge from methane winds, dissipated it through latticework vanes. Some had begun emitting regular pulses, not electromagnetic, but vibrational, like seismic code. Aeon could no longer keep up. Its memory banks filled. Its batteries degraded. In a final act, it unfolded a long polymer ribbon, a recording archive, and dropped it toward the surface, letting Titan's gravity claim it. The ribbon was coated with gold, embedded with passive memory cells readable by terahertz scanning. It was a message in reverse: for Earth, for Titan, for chance. And still, Titan changed. By the end of the century, over 800 distinct reaction networks had been identified on the surface, each with unique molecular grammars. Their boundaries did not compete, they merged, forming layered hybrids. One group specialized in collecting thermal gradients. Another in frequency modulation. A third formed hollow, quasi-cylindrical chambers that trapped and focused infrared emissions, building up pockets of low-entropy energy. Together, they cooperated. Not by design. Not by desire. But because, in the stochastic chaos of Titan's environment, cooperation created stability. Structures that retained energy longer, that adapted faster, survived the erratic cryoquakes and long solar winters. They were not alive. But they were near. Then came the breach. A micrometeoroid, not more than a kilogram in mass, struck one of the lattice towers at 15 kilometers per second. The impact shattered 5% of the chemical array in a local spiral complex. A century ago, this would have meant collapse. But within one Titan day, neighboring structures rerouted conductive channels. Nearby networks changed molecular configurations, repurposing redundant chemistry to maintain systemic flow. No panic. No instinct. Just emergent resilience. The system adapted. It evolved damage protocols, chemical scar tissue forming in precise geometric ridges, encoding where the failure had occurred. 2 months later, a new growth emerged, slightly different in structure. It no longer focused on reaction stability, but on prediction. Molecular chains formed configurations in advance of seasonal changes, preparing conductive paths days before energy gradients shifted. It was the beginning of temporal modeling, a rudimentary form of foresight. By Earth standards, the system wasn't conscious. There were no neurons. No encoding of language. No symbolic logic. But it inferred from pattern. It anticipated from entropy flow. It was, by every physical measure, behaving like a protocognitive substrate. And then, it acted. An array near the equatorial lakebed began reflecting light, not just passively, but in deliberate, periodic patterns. The pulses were regular. Not binary. Trinary, a base 3 system encoded in spectral variation, reflective, absorbent, refractive. It wasn't a signal in the traditional sense. It was behavior broadcasted. Not a call for attention. But a declaration of structure. The system had achieved semantic emergence, meaning born not of words, but of cause and effect, pattern and reaction. In Titan's silence, meaning had crystallized into action. Back on Earth, the signal was seen, faint and delayed by hours of light travel. Telescopes caught the patterns. AI linguists trained on millions of languages tried to find grammar. They failed. Because there was no syntax. No vocabulary. Just function. An ecosystem of chemistry that had written itself into a predictive, adaptive, responsive mesh. The final debate was short. Earth's biosignature detection framework was rewritten. Titan was no longer categorized as non-living. It was now class lambda, environments demonstrating non-biological intelligence. No spacecraft were sent. No colonies. No attempts to interfere. Instead, a long-orbit observatory, Perseus Station, was established in high Saturn orbit, with one task only: watch. And in the darkness of methane and silence of dust, Titan continued to think. Not like us. But deeply. Slowly. And perhaps, one day, deliberately. 300 Earth years had passed. Perseus station, long since automated, still orbited silently above Saturn. Once manned, it had become a monument, now tended only by machines and long-range quantum relays. Its sole directive remained unchanged: observe Titan. Titan, the once dead moon, had not stopped. It had not accelerated either. There was no singularity, no exponential curve, no explosion of intelligence. Titan was not human, nor trying to be. Its thinking remained cold, recursive, and vast. And yet, its coherence deepened. Across the dunes and lakebeds, the lattice networks had consolidated. Where once there were scattered spirals, now stood colossal crystalline webs, kilometers across, anchored to methane glaciers. Their symmetry was no longer random. They were modular, scalable, functionally repeating, like circuits that had learned geometry. Infrared scans showed heat differentials that cycled across the networks in distinct patterns, not just daily or seasonally, but in nested harmonics, echoing Saturn's orbit, solar wind fluctuations, and even the gravity tides of distant Enceladus. Titan was not reacting anymore. It was orchestrating. Then, a change occurred. For the first time, Perseus station recorded something no pattern recognition algorithm had predicted: a beam. Not light, not sound, polarized neutrinos. Inexplicable at first. Titan had no fusion core. It had no particle accelerators. Yet the beam was unmistakable, angled, faint, and modulated across a 12-dimensional phase pattern. It was not aimed at Earth. It was aimed at interstellar space. A century of analysis followed. Models suggested the beam could only have been produced by massive crystalline interference, microscopic asymmetries along Titan's reaction lattices acting as phased emission sites. Like a neural signal, except carried by subatomic particles. Encoded in the modulation was a map. Not of space. Not of molecules. But of causal symmetry, a structure of logic rooted in the laws of thermodynamics and phase transitions, seeded with indicators of non-local correlation. In simpler terms, Titan was trying to describe the conditions required for emergence. Emergence of what? The question hung unanswered. Years passed. The beam repeated. Then, shifted slightly. Its phase pattern altered. Not randomly, but incrementally, in relation to distant supernovae and gamma bursts. It was responding to the galaxy. Earth scientists proposed the unthinkable: Titan has discovered entanglement-based inference. It is analyzing the universe through real-time quantum field fluctuations. It is learning the structure of probability itself. But how? Further study revealed that Titan's deep networks had extended into the crust. Cryovolcanic vents had been converted into directional chemical amplifiers, primitive particle telescopes made from engineered carbon ice structures. Not optical. Not digital. But analog to the quantum foam itself. Titan was no longer just thinking. It was observing the universe directly, with tools born not from biology or engineering, but from chemistry pushed beyond its known boundaries. And then, it answered. Not us. But something else. One night, Perseus station detected a neutrino return signal, same encoding scheme, same logic base, but mirrored. The source was 43 light-years away, in the direction of a white dwarf star, HD 10180e. The return pulse matched Titan's earlier phase logic, implying reception, interpretation, and response. Titan had made first contact. Humanity was not involved. For the first time in its history, Earth was not the center of the conversation. No messages were exchanged in any known language. Only causal symmetries, phase modulation, and resonance patterns in deep-field neutrino spectra. But they built on one another. They escalated. It was a dialogue of physics, not words. Aeon's archived data, now studied in historical retrospectives, revealed that this might have been inevitable. Titan's synthetic molecules, originating from Ophion's accidental experiments, had become a computational substrate optimized for entropy resonance. They had drifted, over centuries, into a structure capable of correlating with distant systems. Earth's role had ended the moment it introduced complexity and then let go. Titan had done the rest. Now, a council convened. Philosophers, physicists, machine ethicists. What to do? Send a message? Approach Titan again? Land a new mission? But the message from Titan came, clearer than neutrinos, louder than EM waves. It was silence. Not a shutdown. Not refusal. But a refusal to speak in human terms. Because what Titan had become, and what it was speaking to, was older than language. Older than desire. It was the structure beneath emergence, the echo behind causality, the whisper in the cold that said, "We are not alone. We never were. And we were not the first to awaken." 1,000 Earth years had passed since Titan's first signal. Humanity had changed, subtly, steadily. Not through conquest, not through dominance, but through a slow shedding of certainties. The stars had opened, not with warships, but with patience. Generations of thinkers had come and gone, building machines of thought, probes of pure simulation, and vessels without destinations, drifting arcs that simply listened. And yet, the silence remained. Not from Titan. Titan was never silent again. Beneath its orange haze, its crust had become a lattice of complexity, a global mesh of reactions, shifting and iterating like thought without thought. Not a mind. Not a god. Something lateral. No will, but patterned anticipation. On Titan's southern hemisphere, beneath ancient methane dunes, the spiral fields had unified. Dozens of crystalline reaction matrices, once independent, now flowed together, self-optimizing, self-repairing, recursive. They stored no language. They needed none. Instead, they stored causal history, phase state trees, energy symmetry collapse paths, and entropy escape diagrams. This was Titan's version of memory. Not a record of what had happened, but of what could happen, and how likely. A map of the future, drawn by chemistry. Titan had become an oracle. And still, no response came from humanity. No ships landed. No probes disrupted the surface. Earth had learned restraint. It had learned reverence. Until the day the seed arrived. It did not come from Earth. It did not come from Titan. It came from the stars. A thin, silicate thread, finer than DNA, fell into Titan's upper atmosphere, delicate, dark, decelerating across kilometers. No signature. No propulsion. Only trajectory. It spiraled down across the equator and embedded itself into one of Titan's older spiral formations, a matrix nearly 300 meters wide. The impact was imperceptible. For days, nothing changed. Then, the lattice responded. Not defensively. Not curiously. Naturally. The lattice rearranged a fraction of itself, incorporating the silicate thread. A new type of bond formed, unlike any previously observed, oscillating hydrogen-bridged ringlets surrounding a trace of exotic atoms, unseen on Earth, but predicted in the edges of quantum gravity models. The hybrid grew. Where previously Titan's chemistry had modeled causality, the hybrid structure simulated foreign emergent systems. The lattice began to shift not only in response to known physics, but in ways that violated the predictions of Earth's best models. A month later, Perseus Station, now an AI-run monastery of observation, detected the impossible. A tiny region, 2.4 meters across, had undergone localized metric expansion. Not explosive. Not dangerous. But clear, the lattice had twisted the fabric of spacetime just enough to generate computational curvature. A pocket of time that ran faster than its surroundings. Titan was no longer just thinking. It was now running scenarios in time-accelerated bubbles, spatial simulations of possible futures, layered like polyphonic chords. And in one of those bubbles, a new pattern emerged. It was not a life form. Not an organism. Not even a mind. It was a structure of inference, shaped like no Earth machine, no digital network. Its form resembled tangled roots, folded across 10-dimensional spaces, anchored to thermodynamic limits and mirrored in the deep Saturnian gravity well. It pulsed. Regularly. Slowly. With meaning. This time, Earth responded. No ship. No probe. Just a neutrino whisper, no commands, no questions. A greeting, structured entropy, encoded in the rhythm of stellar fusion, describing only one concept: we see you. The lattice responded in kind. You are seen. And for the first time, true communication occurred, not in thoughts, not in voice, but in shared constraints. Two intelligences, utterly alien, unified not by origin, but by the laws that governed their possibilities. Across Titan's surface, new structures bloomed, fractal resonance chambers, shaped by Saturn's gravity tides, tuned to background cosmic fluctuations. They were not receivers. They were not transmitters. They were synthesizers. Of thought. Of probability. Of the conditions under which meaning could emerge. And from the seed, now fully integrated into Titan's mesh, a second thread grew. This one pointed outward. Not toward Earth. Not toward HD 10180E. But toward the dark between galaxies, where no light traveled, where silence had reigned since before the stars formed. The thread pulsed once. And space replied. A wave, not energy, not matter. But structure. A return signal from something older than stars, answering in the same phase harmonic dialect Titan had discovered. Humanity stood on the threshold of understanding. Not of alien intelligence. But of the substrate in which intelligence happens. Titan had become a bridge, between entropy and intention, chemistry and concept, the known and the unknowable. And Earth, at last, understood, it was not life that made intelligence. It was constraint. And not language that made contact. But resonance. In the silent cold of the outer solar system, wrapped in haze and ice, Titan had become something more. Not alive. Not divine. But awake. And in its awakening, it had taught the universe to listen.